960 pixels, right? Okay. When we come in here and we say, I want this thing to be 960 pixels wide, that is the width of just the content. Just the content, okay? So if the container went around the content like a spandex suit, right, the content would go right up to the edges of the container. Are you seeing that in your own design right now? For anybody who's put a border on or put a background color on to any of your stuff, you've noticed that your words go right up to the edge, right? And so they're like sitting on the edge, okay? Sometimes you want to add in some space because it feels just a little too tight in there. When you start to add the space using like padding, that's between the content and the border, right? When you start to add that space in here, you're actually increasing the width of your container. So, in this case right here, let's say that I made my box, whatever box it was, 100 pixels wide, okay? And then I went in and I said, ooh, but I need to put a little bit of space around because when I put it in, my words were up against the edge like that, and I didn't like that, right? So in this case, I made the width was 100 pixels. But as soon as I did that, I noticed that all my words were like really tight in there and I wanted them to have some room, okay? So what did I add to it? I added in here padding on the left and padding on the right of 10 pixels. So I wanted to add a little bit of space in here. So I went, okay, that feels a little bit better. There's 10 pixels there. And here's 10 pixels here, okay? So there's 10 and there's 10. So now I have a little bit of extra room, and now that I've added the padding, no words can go into any of this, or like pictures. That's like protected space, okay? That's like buffer zone space in there. So that's my 10 pixels of padding in here. So what is the total width of this box now? 120. It's now 100 pixels right here, plus the 10, and plus the 10 for the padding. So right now I'm at 120 pixels already, okay? But I thought I was just working with 100 pixels. So if I'm trying to think about how these are all gonna sit next to each other, I have to know how to add them up, right? So this one's 110 or 120 pixels now, but what else have I added to it? I made a thick border, right? And the border goes all the way around, but we only care about the width we only care about it on the left and the right. We only care about the width that we're putting in here. So the border here is 5 pixels and 5 pixels. So now how big is my element? And Brittany doesn't get to tell me because she knows.
140? I mean 30?
130, right? Now I've got 100 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 more. So now I ballooned up to 130 and I thought I was only dealing with 100 pixels now, okay? But now I don't want the other box that's next to it to be touching its edge. Too much touching, right? I don't want them to touch. So how do I control the space between elements? What do I do to push things away from each other? Who is that?
Oh, no, that's inside the box.
Padding's inside. Who's outside?
Margin?
The margins. So I've added some margin in here, right? I've added some space in between here of an additional 10 pixels, right? And I put another 10 pixels right here so that nobody else gets to start in this area. So now this element right here, which started out as 100 pixels, has now ballooned up to be 150 pixels wide. That's how much room it's taking up right now. Does this make sense to you?
So nothing in the box, I mean the size of the box doesn't change. What's changing is the pixels.
The box has actually changed because remember before the box used to be skinny like this? It was 100 pixels.
So whenever you use the pixels, it does move to wherever you want it to move. So in other words, it'll move to the right or it'll move
Top or bottom.
Or it'll move.
Yep.
Oh.
So if I add the space,
the pixels, it's the actual box that is also.
Well, the box is kind of staying in one spot, but like its borders are pushing out. So when I'm like, I need to add some space in here, I want to add 10 pixels, it goes whoop, the edge gets out further like that. I'm still in the same spot, but my borders have pushed out. But if I only pushed it out on one side, just that one side would push out, right? So they would go out in any of the directions. But the content, the room for the content is still only 100 pixels.
Yeah.
That never changed. Yeah. So that never changed. That's still sitting right here. This is like the original width is like from here to there. But as we started adding the padding, and we added the margins, and we added the borders, those are all in addition to. Okay?
So even those empty space is still using pixels, even though
Yeah, they're still using pixels. That's right. So like if I have this now, right? Now all of a sudden this thing is 150 pixels wide. That's how much it's taking up. So that's important for me to know because now I can calculate how many of those 150 pixel wide blocks can I fit next to each other inside of their parent, right? Inside of the main or inside of whatever they're inside of, right? So we have to do this math. We cannot get around it. We have to know how to do this math, okay? So this is the content box. This is the default model. There is a simpler model for us to use when we're trying to calculate our widths. May I erase this? Are you taking a picture, Heidi? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the alternative to that, which helps us do our math a little bit more easily in here. So the next one that we're talking about is not the default method. We have to create a CSS rule, a couple of them, to use this method. We have to be like, I want to use a different method. And then once we say that we want to use this other method, the method will be worked and used for everything in your website. Okay, that's the easiest way to do it. We kind of just say like, no, on this website, I'm going to use a different way to add up all my numbers, okay? So we say that, and we just do it for the whole website. The whole website gets done like this, okay? Anytime we need to make a width or add padding or margins. So this is called border box. So the box sizing is set to border box in here. And basically what happens with this one is the width, the padding, the borders are all included in whatever you say the width is. So if I said right here, right, that the width equals 100 pixels, okay, that is my border plus my padding plus the content plus the padding plus the border. All of these fit within my 100 pixels. So I never have to worry about things like getting bigger as I start to add stuff to them. Because this is a real problem when you're doing your numbers and you get in there and you're like, ooh, it's too tight. I don't have enough room. I want to add more padding. You add a little bit more padding, then you bump the last one off, right? It's like that 5 bears in the bed and the little one said, roll over, and then, right, they all rolled over and one fell off. That's kind of what this is like. When you don't do your math right, then one of your boxes falls off the edge. So in this case right here, if we work with this method, the only thing we have to think about is when we start to add the margins outside, right? Those are the pushing things away. That adds to how much space the box is going to be kind of responsible for and traveling with, right? And so we do need to remember that. But guess what? Now we don't have to think about borders and we don't have to think about padding anymore, right? So what happens with this one, how does it work? Well, if we started off with a box that was 100 pixels wide and our words went all the way to the edge, left and right in here, okay? And I didn't add any padding yet and I haven't added any borders yet, right? And then I come in here and I go, oh, I want to add some padding in. What happens is the box stays exactly the same size, right? But the padding makes the words take up less space in here. So notice how my box never got any bigger. I never added any size to that. So then what happens in here is if I decide to add in a border, let's say I try to add in a border and it's kind of thick on both sides, my box doesn't change, right? It's just all the stuff inside now has even less room to exist. So now my words are like that, right? But the box never got any bigger. It never took up any more room. It's way easier to calculate the widths this way, okay? How do you feel about it? Not so bad? Good? Nailed it? No response. Good.
Forgetting.
We need like those clickers. Yeah, we need like little clickers. Click, click, click. I get it. Click, click, click. Okay. So you're gonna do this if you want to set it, right? And you'll have this inside of our handout, so you don't need to like write it down, but you can if you want to. But this is what we're saying. We're saying we want to change the box sizing. And this says for the entire HTML document. That's what this is saying. Everything in the document. And this little character right here, the asterisk, is called the universal selector. And when we use that as a selector, and we can use just that and not with the before and the after, that means everything, all of the elements. So this is what we use also when we make something called a CSS reset. We use this thing called the universal selector. And this universal selector also includes pseudo elements of before and after, because pseudo elements don't actually exist. We don't need to get into it, but they don't really exist. And so they might not be covered under the universal selector because they're not real things that are actually in your code. They can be added to your page even if they don't exist in your HTML. And so we have to refer to them as well in here. So you don't need to know, you don't need to, stress about that. You just put it at the top of your CSS file. You were gonna ask a question? Or you were gonna ask a question? Yeah.
Is this gonna be added to the test?
No.
Okay.
Nothing past, no,
Past doing
not even
the
images.
practice?
Even images aren't in there.
Okay.
Just the intro to code and the CSS and the HTML5 stuff.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so this is what happens, right? This is what we call it float drop. It's like a medical issue when you get float drop. It's like your math didn't add up, right? You had like a certain amount of space to work in and your math didn't add up, and so you get to the last one and there's not enough room for it to squeeze in there, and so it drops to the next line and it's unattractive, okay? Droopy, dropping, floats. All of that sounds yucky. Okay, so this is that containing, like when I talked about the container shrinking up. So when they're floated, right, the parent doesn't see them anymore. So it collapses, but it doesn't collapse downwards. It's like blinds, like a, mini blinds or something. They like go up. And then the parent will not expand vertically to enclose them. And so we can get unattractive designs. And so to contain it, we have to use something called a clear fix. And so the clearing is used in a lot of different ways for a lot of different circumstances, and it's done differently, okay? So one type of clearing helps parents contain, and another just makes things like go back to like not being affected by floats. And we'll look at them both really quickly and then we're almost done. Okay, so clearing will force the element it's applied to go back to acting like a block. We primarily do this to the footer a lot. Because doesn't it seem like the poor footer would get like screwed by all of this? Because everybody comes before the footer. So if you floated anything in your document, the footer's like, thanks. It's always affected. So one of the things that we do to the footer often is we just, in the rule that we make for the footer, because most of the time you kind of make a rule for the footer, you might have like given the footer some padding, or you might have given the footer a background color, you might have given it a border. So you probably already have a rule for footer somewhere in your style sheet, right? And all we have to do for that is we say clear and both. And the both means like anything that was floated to the right that came before me, or anything that was floated to the left before me, I want to clear both of them. I don't want to be affected by either of them. I just want to sit down here and be like a big wide block. That's it. And so for the footer, sometimes, we just put in a clear of both, just to kind of safeguard against it being mishandled, okay? It being affected. So let's see here. We're good. Okay, so we're kind of done with the stuff. Now we're just gonna kind of test ourselves in here. So when you look at this example right here, what elements would need to have floats applied? So if we wanted to make this layout, who needs to have a float applied in here?
All the map. Go center.
The logo.
The logo. Mm-hmm. Who's got another one? What else needs to be floated in here?
Or name.
The nav. It's a nav. It's a vertical nav. So it's either the nav or the main, right? Who do you think should be floated in this instance? Should it be the nav or should it be the main?
Now.
Early to say.
Why the nav?
They're in the same section.
Because the main is bigger.
Nope.
And it's gonna wanna go,
It's not about the size. Allie, why is it? Why do we know that it comes before? Or why should it come before? Why should the nav come before?
Because it's at the top.
It's not at the top though, the nav's right here. Might be, but why would it be at the top of the code? Should the nav come first before you get to the main? What do you think?
Yes.
So one of the things that we need to think about with this is, though we can reorganize the order that we perceive things to show up, we also need to think about the fact that CSS is not a constant, okay? CSS could disappear at any time. Somebody could turn the CSS off on their browser. Do you think that it would be a better experience for them to have your header with your logo and then have all of the main and then be fed your navigation? Or do you think that the navigation should probably occur just in order to understand the document? Kind of makes sense that we wouldn't be like, oh, we'll just like, you know, start with the footer and then we'll throw in some main and then maybe we'll do an aside and then I'm going to get to the navigation last because I can just rearrange it using CSS however I want, right? Not really. We still need to think about like, how should people logically encounter our content, okay? And that's how we code it. We always code it based on how people should interpret it. Then afterwards in the CSS, if we decide to move things around visually, to change the layout, that's one thing. But we don't want to disrupt the flow of content in the code because not everybody sees it visually, right? We have a lot of people who might encounter your data and they are not sighted. Do you want them to have to wait and read through everything in the main to get to the navigation so they can know what pages are on your website? We don't. So we always want to code logically, and then with the CSS we might visually treat them and rearrange them. Does that make sense? Okay, so in this case right here, so we want the nav to float because it's the first thing. It would have come first before main. What other things need to float in here? The boxes that have the images and the headlines and the paragraphs in them, right? So these would be the things that we would be floating in here. Okay, other things that we need to note in here. So after we floated those things, we also want to make sure that main has a margin on the left to keep it a column, right? Because what if nav got real short? Would we want main to come over and kind of create that L shape? Probably not, right? Maybe you do, you might want that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that in this example, I don't want that to happen. Other things in here, right? So we need to calculate the widths for those floated image text divs. And then we would need to do a clear in a couple of areas in here. One is header has this floated element, okay? If that image was taller than the headline plus the paragraph, it would look like this. Right? So here would be our H1, and here would be our paragraph. And then if there's nothing else in there and the image is taller than the height of these two lines together, this thing is going to shrink up, okay? So this header needs to be told, or tricked is what it really is. It needs to be tricked into getting tall and containing its logo, okay? So that gets a clear fix. And then the same thing with these three. Where would this bottom line go right now, based on what you see in here right now? These three things are floating. Where does that line go? Where does the bottom of main go? I got plenty of time. I've already done this tutorial, so I don't need to do it again. But where do you think that line is going to go? Where's the bottom of main going to go?
I'm right out to the footer.
Not going to go to the footer. This bottom line right here, this one, right? This is the end of the main. These three things are floated. Where is this thing going to be before? This is after we've applied a clear. Where is it going to go before we apply a clear?
Under the nav.
Not under the nav. Nope.
into the footer.
Nope.
No.
Would be right up against the photos and the information. Oh, it would go up, right?
remember the dangle? Do I need to draw the dangle again? Oh, the dangle, you guys. There's the dangle, right? And here are my images in here. And main should be coming down underneath here, but it doesn't see any of these things. So what does it do? Who does it see? Who's not floating? The H1 in the paragraph. The main page headline and the first supporting sentence, those aren't floated, right? So main sees them, and it's like, oh, I see you, I recognize you, right? So if here's my paragraph right here, main is actually gonna come down and it's only gonna go like this. This is the bottom of main. Aside is still coming down like this, right? All the way down to the bottom. Footer is still sitting down here, but we've got this awkward gap in here where there's no main, okay? Main is still thinks it's way up here in the top. So if we don't make it contain its floated children in here, it's just gonna stay up there like that. And if you put a border on it, or you put a background color in it, or you put an image in there, that's where it's gonna end, okay? And those things are, contain your children, yeah. Contain your children. Okay, that's it. Yay! Alrighty, let's take a little break for a minute, and then you can come back and I'll get your tutorial ready and you can ask more questions if you have any. And yeah, so go take like a 5-minute break.
That's bad answer. That was not.
Yeah, 5 to 10 on Saturday.
Okay, wait. Okay,
Do you want to do this tonight or do you want to do it on Monday? We're going to do it on Monday. You can do it either way. You'll have to do it on Monday probably too, or you can tune us out. But it's up to you.
Oh, so when are you doing that, sir?
Saturday I'm free from.
So you would like to?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you scoot in right here in this, or you can sit anywhere, but that's a spot right there next to Priscilla.
That one at the end.
Actually that belongs to somebody else, so why don't you sit right here?
Yeah.